Hi class. For the second DQ this week, you're identifying a subject and you are writing a objective for meeting the needs of diverse learners. This is a pretty broad discussion question. And first I want to clarify a few things that I feel like maybe this course hasn't clarified for you by this point. One thing is objective writing. I want you to know objective writing is hard. It takes so much time for teachers to develop. I spent a lot of time refining objectives in professional development meetings, learning about the difference between content objective and language objectives. And then in this course, you learned about understand, know, and do objectives. Some districts use things called learning targets. My district used things called goals. I have content goals, language goals, and social goals. The bottom line is you're going to hear a lot of language around objectives. What's the most important thing is that you write an objective that you know exactly what students are going to do, and you know exactly how you're going to assess that. Is it measurable? So when you learned about writing objectives, we did a know, understand, and do objective. That's really helpful when I'm taking a standard and I'm breaking it down. I want to know with this standard, what do students need to know and understand and then be able to do. In the very first week, I provided a video where I broke down a standard on time and I broke it into objectives. When you look at that, you'll see that I kind of have that know and understand kind of all embedded. And I ended up with a bottom row of about 4 or 5 objectives on time. When it comes to objectives, they're taught on a day, or they're written on a daily level. So what do I want students to learn today? Standards are really big and really meaty. So I don't teach one standard in a day. It could take me weeks to develop a standard. And some standards, like our fluency standards, like reading with fluency, or some of our mathematical fluency standards, those take all year to develop. So what I want you to know about objectives is really when we're writing an objective, we can break it down into really small chunks. So what do I want students to learn on this one day? In my time example, I might say today, kids are just learning how to read an analog clock. That's it. Or read and write. So I could have 2 ideas there, 2 of my verbs. But we're not going to do elapsed time yet. We're not ready for elapsed time. That's a different day. And so when you're using your objectives from topic 2, I said use that do objective. What do we want students to be able to do? That's the objective that's going to go on your lesson plan. You're going to be writing a lot of lesson plans throughout your coursework with GCU and the education program. And so I want you to have a clear understanding of what objective actually goes on that lesson plan, and think about daily level, what do I want them to learn in one day? And so if they can't do it in one class period, you're thinking a little bit bigger. And so objectives are down to that smaller chunk. In addition to writing your objectives, you're going to want to think about a diverse population. And so I want you to think about a diverse population you see in the schools around you. I worked a lot with English language learners. I worked in lower income areas, and I always had the self-contained English language learner group. And so when I give my examples, I tend to talk about English language learners because that was the population of students that I worked with. I want you to think about the population of students that you might work with or that you might want to work with. Do you want to work with gifted students? Do you want to work with special education students? There's so many different diverse populations, you know, within what we're teaching, that I want you to kind of lean towards one that you think you're going to work with when you do this DQ. So when you're thinking about them, think about what their needs are. I worked with English language learners. They have language barriers. So how can I break down language barriers for them without resorting to translations? Because I had refugees from Iraq, I had refugees from Africa, I had students from Myanmar. So I can't translate everything for them. So it's really important that we break those language barriers down using English because we're trying to help our students learn English. So when I would plan lessons, I would think about visual aids, hands-on materials, and sometimes some smaller chunks, or I would use text that was easier to read or leveled texts so students could get different levels based on their reading level. So whatever I could do to break down those language barriers. If they were having to write or speak, I would often give them sentence frames so they would know how to put what they were trying to say into sentences. Um, or I give them word banks or vocabulary sheets where they can look at what the words mean that we're going to be using in the lesson today. So I want you to think about the barriers that a student would have when you're writing your objective. So once you choose that subject area and you think about that special population, then you're going to write an objective. Remember, one day, what would you do one day around this standard? That'll take weeks probably to develop. And what would you do to be able to help them understand or break those barriers down? And so you're going to include that in your objective statement. Often objectives start with the phrase, students will be able to. So it's good practice just to have that at the very beginning. So your objective statement might be something like this. Students will be able to demonstrate place value understanding through the hundreds place using base 10 blocks. So in that objective statement, I told you what students are going to be able to do. They're going to demonstrate place value understanding. And so we're going to 3-digit numbers. So that's the content they're going to be learning that I pulled from the standard. And then they're using the base 10 blocks because I'm working with language learners and they need visuals. And so to help them understand place value, I'm going to use those base 10 blocks to help them understand place value. And so within that, it was one concise statement. Objectives should be nice, concise statements. They're not summaries. Objectives often are, teachers must write them on their board or post them in their classroom. You don't want this long summary. Students should be able to look up at the board and go, oh, I'm understanding place value and I'm going to use place value blocks. So when you're writing those objectives, keep them concise. They are concise statements. I hope this helps as you start to wrap your head around what a good objective sound like and how we can support the needs of our diverse learners. Have a wonderful week.